Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna. So first of all, I'll introduce Mike Kibble. Mike's our software engineer in CX Pilots. So he's going to be the man who's going to, any clever, difficult questions around AI, he's going to be the man who's supporting me. So just want to say hi, Mike, maybe to everybody.
Hi.
Okay.
I'm very happy to answer any questions you have about AIs, LLMs, the sort of topics Stephen will be alluding to technically.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. So it's going to be a little bit fast and furious. I'm going to try and finish this in 45 minutes. I do have 70 slides, so there we go. So I've set myself a big target here. So if I confuse everybody and feel it's not flowing well, I'll slow down, okay, and we'll sort it out. First of all, because there's a bit to get through, I'd like you to put your questions in the chat, hold fire, and I'll leave 15 minutes at the end where we will answer those. It also gives Mike a chance to pick out the difficult ones and be prepared. Yeah, okay. So I'm now going to share my screen. So if you can bear with me a second. Okay, so can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, if there's any problems about hearing me, just feel free to interject. And we'll go for it right now. Okay, first of all, let me just get one thing out the way. It's in the way. That's that little sharing thing. So I can't see anybody now, so I'll just be going through this. So, but again, please put in chat your questions. Okay, who am I? Stephen Walton. I've been a CX professional for the last 18 years. I'm ex-Ericsson, Teletech, Gartner, Motor Insurers Bureau, and most recently with the betting and gambling company Entain Group, Coral and Ladbrokes. I've designed Forrester-cited emotion metrics, and I led the emotion topic building in the Medallia platform for the Entain Group. So a little bit of background, although I'm not an engineer, a little bit of background in emotion. We're not going to leap straight into AI engineering, but what I'm going to do first of all, I'm going to tell you a story about a new methodology based on emotion principles and existing data. So hopefully we'll roll up to the software side. And the subject really is training artificial intelligence and machine learning to understand emotions in text and raise a new thing called emotion alerts. And the whole purpose of this is to try and see where can we and how can we make emotions actionable and measurable in voice of the customer systems, your Medallia and your Qualtrics platforms and the like, and provide an emotion basis for the move to what is called large language models. Now, a little bit of technical term there. I don't know how much the audience knows, but a lot of these existing models are not quite as sophisticated enough to really get and understand emotional patterning in text, i.e. in verbatims. And I'll come to evidence for that in a while. So what they need is they need to be educated, if you like, the algorithms as they move to large language models. Okay. So straight off the bat, what are we, in very short executive summary terms, what have we found? So in spite of what is said in the CX community and organizations like Forrester, we have found that existing satisfaction surveys are enough to understand the emotional context of most experiences. However, what they need is enrichment developed through the use of emotion alerts, which we'll go into. I'll give some evidence about that, but before I give the evidence, these are the luminaries that I've interviewed, apart from myself, of course. Piers Allington, who has over 20 years experience as ex-CEO of Feedback Ferret and Text Analytics. Alex Mead, Global Customer Service Experience Chief, often on LinkedIn, who's given some great case studies. Mike, of course, who's the engineering genius. We also reviewed a lot of the emotion psychology literature and existing research that's out there. In actual fact, this is the list of 30 or 40 case studies, academic reviews on emotion and how much it explains outcome variables like spend, satisfaction, loyalty, and so on and so forth. So we've done a complete look at that. Of course, some of you may be saying, well, that's all scaled data to get that predictive capability, and that is true. There is a failing with any and all of the emotion psychology literature in not in being overly dependent sometimes on Likert scales, but it is enough, I would argue, as well as text information we gleaned from Feedback Ferret and Piers Allington to make the statements that in most cases satisfaction is enough. But bear in mind, If it was just satisfaction is enough, that'll be the end of the presentation. So I got some extra information for you about how you should genuinely look at emotion. So first of all, let's now have a look at some of the research and answer the question, how does emotion relate to customer experience, and does emotion drive value? What are the results? Well, first of all, let's understand a little bit about what emotions mean, because I think in the customer experience world, there is one definition. In the emotion psychology world, tends to be a little bit different, the context. I'm going to call these the weak definition and the strong definition. So in general terms, in neuroscience and psychology, it is true. Emotions are important in every single decision that is made, just as thought is, okay? So through the neuroscience work of Antonio Damasio, emotions have been shown to be fundamental to how we make decisions. And there's a great phrase here, they're called emotions are in the loop of reason. But that's a fairly sort of bland definition. I don't think that's quite what customer experience professionals mean when they try and engage and try and focus emotion. They really say emotions are almost a wow, a pizzazz, something a little bit extra, something different than clues of functionality, as per the MIT Sloan Management Review from Berry, Carbone, and Heikel in spring 2002. Organizations like Forrester try to make it something different, almost like there's a different part of your brain that has emotions written in it, separate from the context. I strongly disagree with that, and we'll come to that first. In many ways, like Stu Leonard's, that's making it an emotional experience is what the CX profession is talking about. And there is some value in that, don't get me wrong. But most of the time, from our looking at those papers, if you saw before, those 33 papers that we looked through, 99 regressions, most of the time, the impact of emotion scores on spend, on loyalty, is weak to moderate. A meta-analysis likewise shows most emotions collapse down to satisfaction, dissatisfaction. And remember the text analysis I spoke about from Feedback Ferret, which I think is just as strong, if not even more strong data. Only between 5 to 30% of text includes anything emotional. Customers, clients are very difficult for them to express emotion. In actual fact, in Feedback Ferret's case, they rarely found more than 3 or 4 emotion topics in the top 20 drivers. Remember, this is over all experience. It's almost like a general view of emotion. So that makes perfect sense, actually. When you go to the supermarket, when you buy food, your emotional sense of buying is well covered by a satisfaction survey. First time we visit a new supermarket, we may feel pleasure. The 10th time, it's just decent enough. It's satisfactory. We might even start noticing negative things, but our emotions are regulated. We don't need to feel intensely all the time. Often buying carrots versus buying a Fabergé egg, different sense of product or service, different emotional connotations to it. So there's painting a picture for you at the moment that's quite negative. It's sort of said, well, satisfaction is enough, attitudine is enough. So why is this when organizations are so fixed on their view that emotion underpins customer experience? We looked at this a little bit more by trying to unpick some of the key principles around emotion. So all this data was saying it was fairly bland out there in the market, but what is the purpose of emotion then? If emotions are important, as we assume they are, there must be some context where it's really important, not just unimportant as the satisfaction data, that data I mean would indicate. So we looked at some key texts to extract those emotion principles. There's 4 key books: Cognitive Structure of Emotions, Best-Laid Schemes, Emotions Adaptation, and more recently, How Emotions Are Made by Lisa Feldman Barrett, who I also interviewed, that help us define where emotions are important. Also, bear in mind another important paper called The Affective Lexicon, which I'll come to in a minute. What we basically established was a set of principles that emotions tend to be constructed on the fly. Context is absolutely critical. Narratives, the stories we say are to that text again, is critical. even more so than Likert scales. Emotions are based on appraisals. We just don't feel in isolation, we feel because of something. So how is that because of something expressed? And we come up with a really important concept here of emotion phraseology. So remember that, we'll come back to it when we talk about emotion alerts. Use a library of emotion words so you understand the full coverage of what an emotion is. And critically, emotions are there because they alert us to something. This is why you don't find in general consumer world emotions standing out more and above satisfaction, dissatisfaction surveys. The emotions are for learning. They hold an alert function. We feel when we need to feel. Okay, so there's some of the key things. And the first learning we had when we looked at this was to say, okay, what kind of emotion graphs or emotion schemas are there out there? And do they, first of all, cover what could be emotion? So we understand that emotions alert us to something. We understand that they need to stand out different than satisfaction, dissatisfaction. What words could we use? What is the sense of emotion then? A lot of the literature, a lot of the AI literature tends to use the Plutchik scale, that flower diagram in the center there of 20 or 30 key emotion words. But in actual fact, when we looked at it further, the coverage of emotion is much more than that, particularly when we look at narrative. Remember the principle before? We need to measure, the best way to measure is looking at narrative for emotions, and we'll come to that in a minute. So I'm going to actually posit that emotion is not necessarily the best word, it's affect. So anything, a mood, emotion that has some affect, a general feeling, is important. And that covers a whole swathe of other words that I would absolutely state we need to pick up, understand how customers are talking about these and be aware of them. For instance, I was kept on edge in the live chat. Kept on edge, it has some sort of emotional sense to it. I was dejected, you would not return my money. There's even some words that are not so much, more physical, like filling in these documents made me sleepy, or out of control, all over the place with my payments, or confusion, more cognitive sense, I can't find discounts. So what we're trying to say is the first principle of when we're looking to measure emotion is expand the categories to include other type words that have that little bit of underlying sense of emotion, may not be the full emotion word like anger, or disgust, but should not be discounted, because then your coverage will be weak. Okay. The second thing we found was sentiment is not enough. Many, particularly text companies and voice the customer platforms, would say use sentiment. That is enough to measure emotion. I would say no. And a great example of that is we once found tagged in the system the word kill myself in chat text. It's quite a strong emotional connotations to that phrase, but it was tagged in sentiment, but nowhere else. So you have to be aware that sentiment is such a broad category of positive and negative that it often doesn't pick up these emotional connotations. Also bear in mind that emotion words are only proxies. If as a chat script, for instance, if I was writing in text, I might say, please, can you give me this discount in chat, even though I might be really, really angry. So we almost be aware of that when we're looking to measure emotions, we have to be aware that we're only ever looking at proxies. Okay, in summary then, what I've described to you is that we looked at the empirical data around emotion. We found that in most contexts, emotions are measured perfectly satisfactorily through satisfaction, dissatisfaction. We also looked at the theory of emotion and found that emotions are alerts, and we need to look at narrative. And when we looked at narrative, how it's captured in text, we found some gaps. Okay, so what we need to do then, if you accept that, if you want to make it practical again, not worry so much whether an emotion word is perfectly in line with how someone's feel. If you want to make it practical, then you have to mine for nuggets. And we are suggesting the best way to do that is not to run a survey in terms of that Likert scaling, but capture in those narratives, because that is the best and closest measure to understand how people feel. And mine those narratives, especially in chat. Live chat is a great source of data rather than being overly dependent on surveys, where you can get a full scripts and understand the emotional affect feelings of your customers as they experience them. Okay, so how do we turn this theory into practice? I think the first thing is you need to do is you don't need to boil the ocean with emotion. If you look at how big data analytics does it mostly, as we've seen, it's about sucking in as much data as you possibly can and making an assumption through A that this is emotional or that is not emotional. Again, for me, that is not the correct way to do, because it's, again, for several technical as well as practical reasons. Again, if emotions are alerts to something that's important, we do not need to measure everything. Bear that in mind as I go through. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is the first thing is this emotional intensity expression charts. When you're thinking in my organization, for customer experience, we say emotion is important or affect. Where should we measure is a critical question. Because oftentimes when there's a high ability to express something by somebody, say in a verbatim in a survey, just satisfaction is enough. Sometimes in the dimension of ability to express emotion, where there isn't really very much emotion or it's low, we might just use customer effort score, an ease kind of approach. In some cases, in the top left, the ability of the customer to express their emotion is low. For instance, there is no survey at login, but we can see that emotional intensity through ethnographic research. For instance, we can use quantum metrics and those kind of things to see where there are rage clicks and so forth. The area that I'm most interested in and we are most interested in is where the business can identify customers who can have a high ability to express an emotion in text or voiced text that demonstrates a high intensity, an emotional intensity that we should be alerted to. And that kind of environment is things such as red word teams. So these are recovery teams in the gambling industry, for instance. Those would be teams looking at very specific negative situations where somebody's out of control or somebody's facing a crisis. In loans, for instance, or in the client experience world, face-to-face, I'll tell my account manager how I feel. That may alert them to something. So there are very specific circumstances where we get that top right box where we need to know that it's highly emotionally intensive, this issue from the customer, and the customer can also express it. And that's the concept of emotion alerts. It's not whether emotions are important, it's where emotions are important. And this is very different from other organizations that look absolutely everywhere on big data, for instance, and try and train their AI to the nth degree using non-contextualized data to look for emotions. You don't need to do that. I'll come to the process that we apply in emotion alerts in a minute. Okay. So let's delve a little bit more into that top right box to see where emotions are important. And emotions are particularly important in regulatory environments, or where there's an expression of debt or a mental health problem. For instance, an energy company going to automatic payments processing would lose that customer understanding. The customer is reduced to a data report. The 1% of customers that are feeling really negative are outweighed by the 99% that are not. But if we can understand where emotions are really important, where they alert us to something important, the context that they're talking about really stands out. For instance, with one energy company, they took one recorded phone call, so voice to text, to realize the true impact when one buyer stated that they could not feed their 18-month-old because of an incorrect bill. So what we're saying, that one individual is a weak signal, but it's really, really critical that the business responds to it. Emotions are alert. They're weak signals to something critical that you need to understand, especially important in regulatory environments where, for instance, in the gambling and betting industry, an instance where some things go wrong with one individual can lead to multi-million-pound fines. So if you're in the regulatory industry, this becomes really important. Emotions, standout intensity of feeling can be written in text. We can highlight it, we can alert it, we can respond to it. So the next question is, how well is your text tagged? And we'll come to that in a minute. Another area of real value is in interaction analytics. And we'll get to some examples about this, but Alex Mead mentioned not one single company in the world picks out the context. I try to get companies to think like that rather than depend on a product off the shelf. So what do we mean by that? Normally, somebody might say, you lost my bag. It contains the bridesmaid's dress and weddings in 2 days. And things are set up for the company to respond to you lost my bag, not the context of the bridesmaid's dresses and the weddings, which really encapsulates the emotional feel and the importance of it. Likewise, we can see my flight's delayed. I'm going to my mother's funeral. That requires a different response than a standard apology for the delay in a refund form. So these, again, these emotionally charged verbatims really act as a powerful call for interaction analytics to change your workflows. I ordered a gift for my mother's 50th wedding anniversary and the order has been delayed. That requires a different response from the company than an automated chatbot response saying you'll be refunded in 2 days. In actual fact, this use of emotion phraseology to fire off emotion alerts that lead to new workflows is brilliantly done in the example of Chewy, a US company that sells dog food. On one occasion, a consumer's dog died after purchase. The company went the extra mile to provide a donation, cancellation of subscription, and funeral notes. So it provides a platform for wow experiences and extra experiences to create and generate loyalty. That can be put in workflows if you have well-established and mature emotion alerts. And this equally applies to the client environment, which in some ways is even more important. The client experience is even more emotional. That relationship between a lawyer and the client, or insurance and B2B insurance. Also, you're looking for relationship clues so that you can tag it and respond to it. My client might be saying that they are facing difficulties using your software or facing difficulties funding. These, again, can be picked up in this form of data. And AI in the financial services, I cribbed this from LinkedIn, is increasingly providing these kind of transformational capabilities. So Morgan Stanley, in the top one, developed an AI-based engine called Next Best Action, delivers customized messages to clients and prospects guided by financial advisors. So already seeing a maturity in AI to at least generate the right workflows for you. The challenge is the data in those verbatims tagged sufficiently for those emotion alerts to link to those workflows? So let's have a look at the existing state of play. I'm not going to go through all these, but I did do a piece of work looking at one of the voice of the customer platforms, looking at chat data in particular, to see, can we actually use voice of the customer platform data as it already exists that pick up these emotion alerts? I've alluded to it a little earlier that sentiment is not enough. In actual fact, when I looked at 2,000 scripts of chat, 60% of emotional phraseology was missing. Emoticons are not tagged. So I'm not going to go through all those issues. We'll share this PowerPoint afterwards. But what I'm trying to say, voice of the customer platforms, as they're currently formulated, do not do this. Qualtrics use 150 off-the-shelf models to determine 50 emotion states over 23 languages. Great for surveys, for chat and more complex data, it lags because it's basic big data models. It does not fit down to the context of your business and the emotional language, or effect language, if you like, that's being used by your customers and clients. And this equally applies, by the way, where you're listing posts. You could equally apply all these principles to the capture and gathering of employee data, whether it's field engineers or NHS social workers. I won't go into this too much, but just bear that in mind. Sources of verbatim data and emotion phraseology used as alerts exist in employee data as well as client and customer experience data. So just have that in mind. So what is the approach then? Well, first of all, we looked through, in addition, the AI press, emotion detection, textual data, and found that they themselves emphasize the criticality of context, emphasize the criticality of training and having humans in the loop to train this data. But as we saw before, when I looked at those emotion principles, they tend to still apply that Plutchik flower diagram. It's not enough. It's not enough. Those examples I gave about how feeling out of control or other sort of affect type words have a bit of emotion in them tend to be missing. So the coverage is not good. But it's grist to the mill. These AI papers talk about the extraction of context yields significant improvements in NLP. Textual data is sequential, hence the order of words and their relation in sentence, i.e. context, play a vital role. What this is actually leading to is the application of deeper computational models, moving from natural language processing to large language models. And if you have questions about that, Mike can let you know more. The move to all these different and pre-transformer, it was traditional NLP, we're now using BERT, bidirectional encoder representation, and transformer XL, and so on and so on and so forth. Deeper computational approaches require better training. So if we roll back, if emotions are alerts, if we need to pick up narrative as the best measure of emotion, if we need to look through that for emotion phraseology, for instance, no one says I'm angry, but they might say that's beyond the pale. It's very rare that people actually specify a specific emotion word. We need to look for emotion phrases. Then that's complex training. You will not get it by building 150 models, generalized models, and then saying these 10 emotion words taken from the Plutchik wheel or flower diagram will pick up those emotion alerts. No, you need fine tuning. You need humans in the loop to train your complex flow of data as you move to large language models, as you develop your emotion alerts. And the secret of all this, which is why it's so critical, is unlike the most big data models that use all data, you only need, remember that 2x2 diagram, to look at the top right-hand corner. If you want to start, go to your recovery teams, ask them for their red word lists, expand those out, train the AI and the machine learning to look for more emotion phraseology, and start with the outcome. What workflow can we get from this? For instance, with Bharti Airtel, I did this. We looked at the verbatims that were given in that particular case, not from chat, but from surveys. And we found, I feel defrauded could be a code in your text that fires off a work stream, because a lot of the language was feeding by a few people was about feeling that their business was looting their account, they were not being listened to, really strong emotion phraseology, thieves, that kind of phraseology that could be trained in the system to generate an alert. Why? Because it's critical and important. We need to know that we're a regulatory industry or an interaction alerts, as you've seen with Chewy, we can create a new outcome from this. So how does this work? How does fine tuning work? If you saw that before, fine tuning with BERT, that one of the lead AI methodologies at the moment for emotion detection. You take your verbatims, you create a training data set established from humans who look at the data, you split into a training set of data, imagine 20,000 pieces of chat, for instance. 15,000 will be trained by the humans, 5,000 are sent to the large language model to see if it can replicate what it's been trained. And that's basically how you do it. We also, as we've seen, we need to change the standard classifications applied within existing big data models away from this and more to the what we saw before, not Plutchik, but the effect classification, to get great coverage, to expand our brief about what emotion could mean. So we've seen this current model, this very engineering view, generalized 150 models that do emotion detection over everything and report on emotion in screens. For instance, this is a really bad screenshot, so I apologize profusely for it. But basically what you have at the top there, if you can see it, is an example of emotion detection intensity from a Qualtrics platform that reports on 30 or 40 emotion words. And those emotion words have to be expressed. Your app navigation is annoying. Tag annoying. Your app is so frustrating to use. Tag frustrating. Very rarely it actually works like that in real life. That reporting, that use of those big data models from industries not relevant to your industry is what's called unsupervised learning. And it's not one that I would think would generate sufficient nuance and sufficient focus for you to generate the workflows for emotion alerts. So what's our approach? Our approach in CX Pilots is very much to take a business view first, not an engineering view. And again, it's to look where emotional phraseology in text can alert us to a workflow that we can train in using humans in the loop for AI and machine learning. We use affect classification because that is bigger coverage than just emotion. So it's very much an outside, it's very much a what outcome do you want to seek from this kind of view. So this is just a reminder, outcome, remember about affect we use, remember sentiment wasn't enough for us. And we posit that the best judges of emotion stroke affect, remember affect was emotional sense and moods, anything that even has a little bit of emotion in it. The best judges of that, the best people who can really train AI to find that phraseology are humans. That's the core nub of it. Most, by the way, claims to AI or emotion training actually come from something else. They come from facial recognition, which may well have some relevance, but is less relevant when we're looking at customer experience and using voice of the customer to train. So what we're talking about is not unsupervised. We're talking about supervised learning at the bottom there that trains the AI to create alerts. Even if it was one alert, you go, we got a defraud code. What emotion phraseology relates to defraud? We have a workflow around it based on that in the Bharti Airtel example. 5% is better than 0% you have now. Even if you create alert when someone puts an emoticon or someone says about their wedding coming up, that can create an alert, interaction alert in that case, that is 5% beneficial, better than 0% as you have it now. And also, very much the case, can be automated. An example just really illustrates why you need humans as well, and why we partner with companies that can provision and look through databases to understand through their machine learning what other phrases add in and can add on top of humans in the loop first, but also looking for within big data sets as well. We don't deny that, any other phrases. This just illustrates something from just one phrase, out of control with my spending. On the right-hand side, we can see 30 or 40 phrases that link to that. So it can be very, very complex. But we're answering, in that particular case, a very specific workflow. Out of control with my spending in any context is an alert, a red flag that can lead to a indicating trouble in any context, client or customer, where we can take action. Okay, so that's the kind of thing. And that's particularly critical, by the way, in chat data, because remember, chat data, 60% of it from my analysis of 2,000 pieces of chat was poorly tagged for emotion phraseology. And remember, chat, a great source of real life experiences now that you capture without the need for survey. Okay, so just to illustrate the point, verbatims, you can capture it from, and remember verbatims, emotion, best measure from those principles is narratives expressed and can be expressed by customers or clients that illustrate emotional intensity, that alert, and that can come from chat, can come from survey, can come from voice to text. In this particular example, we had a phraseology, I didn't get paid and I won. This has happened loads of times when I win. You'll see in the current state, this is from the gambling industry, that can actually be seen, because there's two greens, as a positive statement, even though the sense is negative, and the wins in terms of those 4 exclamation marks are not saying what the machine actually thinks. Also, from this example, what you're seeing is the capture of the verbatims, the capture in the platform is not alerting recovery teams, it's not alerting contact center teams to go back and say, is there a problem? How can we help you? By contrast, if you upgrade your tagging of this data, so you link I didn't with happened loads of times, make it negative, you guys are beyond the pale, picking up that phraseology which wasn't picked up before, beyond the pale, as an emotion phraseology that indicates something negative, then you're in the winning. Then you get an alert that wasn't there before that will lead to a recovery team. So another example, just to illustrate, on Monday, Susan from the client recovery team is alerted to distress signal on her dashboard, picked up by emotion alerts, which has been trained in emotion phraseology. I'm struggling with this new payment software. I will miss the deadline. The topic is distress. It relates to customer ID 197845, who has expressed an emotion phrase, I'm struggling and I'll miss the deadline. That raises the SLA, that goes to the billing and other IT stakeholders. That also goes for their workflow and a response, and also goes to the data science team, who now can add more data in. Now they've got some, not just survey-based data, they got data from all sorts of verbatims that's better tagged, and that can amend their churn models, their loyalty prediction models. Perhaps, for instance, it is feeling beyond the pale, or perhaps it is about something really emotionally negative and intense that actually leads to churn down the line. This is adding extra tag data that illustrates what are the drivers and destroyers of red word and intense emotional states. You can also see with interactional analytics, we fired off for the wedding dress or a new workflow. Did that have an impact on spend or loyalty? So it's adding extra data for the BI teams. And also culturally, a lot of these workflows go to the back office. For instance, a payment with your software goes to the IT and billing team. They get to read that. They get to get a sense of empathy around the client or customer. Contact center teams can start to talk about emotion phraseology in their huddles. And we've seen how it can amend churn models. So in short then, the last 5 minutes, emotions alerts is the process. You have a 9-step process. You capture the right verbatims, you engage the recovery teams who currently are in the right place to look and need those emotion alerts, who are interested in emotional intensity, not everything. Those are the teams interested in emotional intensity. You do sampling, humans in the loop analysis, validate the phraseology, phrases like this using the engine to pick up, as we discussed, other phrases. You rule build, develop the emotion schema, IP, that can often be IP, and makes it AI ready to set up workflows, dashboards, models for the Redword team and other teams in the back office, and then hand over for empathy training as required. And we can see this in this particular one. You suck in the data, the narrative data, because emotions are best measured through narrative, suck that in, tag it correctly for alerts and dashboards at the back end for customer services, marketing, analysts, HR, and billing. And they get a real sense from that, because they're not just looking at general bland information for what is emotionally important or not for the customers. And I won't go into this too much, but of course you can start, I mentioned the defraud code and the bottom there about using the Bharti Airtel network. That came from genuine data where people were saying pathetic. too expensive, network breaks, and lots of other things that illustrated a sense that was anger and disappointment that related to feeling defrauded that can then go to the network team and set up a workflow. And there's lots and lots of examples of this. You can even have positive emotion phraseology. It could then be piped through to feed into requests for social media comments. You can look at social media itself and port your emotion phraseology IP into social media to see where toxic comments, for instance, are being made and need to be taken out. Just as, in some way, an extension of what Brandwatch do, which is also a humans in the loop process. And it doesn't have to be all-encompassing and massive exercise. For instance, you can just turn, we want to reduce churn. We want to reduce churn in this particular area around defraud. We want to look at these specific, because that fits to a very specific workflow that we can manage. It's these specific phrases, and then we go from there. So it's not boiling the ocean with emotion. So in summary, artificial intelligence and machine learning needs emotional training. And you know I use the term effect, but treat them side by side for now. Often we capture, and the best way to capture and the most practical way to capture that is in narratives. Narratives need tagging for topics. In voice of the customer systems like Medallia and Qualtrics, they're good off the shelf for surveys, very not so good for chat. Not so good for picking up emotion topics. When we asked one provider, can you give us emotion topics, they just gave 10 words. Disgust, anger. It wasn't enough, because nobody says I'm disgusted. They'll indicate phraseology that leads to that, as we said before. Picking up emotion phraseology is complex. You need humans in the loop. This is why these models stop at giving journey topics, onboarding, or supplementary topics in their topic tagging, such as give me everything that pay by various types of credit card payments, so you can report on onboarding the journey with MasterCard credit cards. But what they're very poor at is emotion topics. And the reason for that, as we saw in the Qualtrics example, is because they are trying to boil the ocean with emotion. They haven't thought and skinnied it down to emotions are alert. Where do we need to alert? So in short, that's really, you can think of lots of situations where you might be able to troubleshoot and come up with various flags. Flag emotion alerts for struggling with shipping documentation, flag for abusive customer, even flags for inclusivity, mental health conditions, and so forth. At-risk situations, or even great situations that fire off an interaction alert, or at-risk situations in a regulatory environment. So that's really what we're talking about, and it all hangs very much on having humans in the loop to train. But because we're not boiling the ocean with emotion, we're really skinny it down something manageable, because our first question is your recovery teams, or create a recovery team, what workflows do you need? And it can only be one workflow, but 5% is better than 0%. So this, don't need to worry about this. This is just really a wrap-up slide, just really to say that this formulates this style of solution is part of understanding humanity and making sense of the world rather than following a computational pure engineering approach. It focuses on that fine-tuning space that's called anthrocomplexity solutions. And I think it's absolutely critical for business now, because whether you like it or not, the efficiency, cost benefits, and new opportunities of AI are on an unstoppable CX wave. We must not leave AI to big data generalities, but focus on training algorithms for human emotional patterning in text and engaging teams in understanding that data. Lots of uses you can use it for. We've been through the schema. There's resale value, training value, and so on, and so analytics value, if we discussed, as well as alert value. We're really looking for the gold nuggets, mining data that we already had, survey, but particularly chat, which is so underused, but so brilliant at live situations and doesn't need a survey. It's low effort. We need to really focus on how we're tagging that data for emotion phraseology. So I think I've achieved it. I think I've got through in 45 minutes. Sorry if that's a lot of information, but I wanted to give you that again. Give you that little story. Hopefully it was okay for you. Think, emotion alerts, it's not whether emotions are important, but where emotions are important. and making sure we link to workflows and extending our ability to capture real narratives from customers and clients, that we tag and upgrade our tagging of those, really to understand how people are talking emotionally and with effect, not just depending on these plotchik flower 20 words that miss out the massive amount of information. Massive amount of information, a gold mine for you, for a red word alert saying where things are risky and wrong, and managing regulatory environments, but also those chewy type interaction events that create new experiences, and critically also engage the back office in understanding customers better by feeding through emotionally laden terms through user roles on dashboards. So I will stop there. So thank you for that. I hope that was okay for you. I hope I didn't go too fast. I had a bit of a challenge there to do that, but I'm hoping it was okay. So Anna, was that okay?
It was perfect. Thank you so much. We have few comments in the chat. Maybe you can go to can you read them out? Bella wrote something, and
yeah.
I think that DJ answered, but you can.
Which other chat? Yeah, I'm going to ask Mike. Maybe you might want to take yourself off mute, Mike, because I'd like you to maybe give your 2 penneth worths, if that's okay. When you're ready, Mike, don't worry. Which other channels apart from chats can we use to mine the data? So first of all, I would say voice to text. Secondly, I would say surveys are absolutely viable. That defraud code came from survey. There was no question in the survey about, do I feel defrauded? It came from looking for the emotion phraseology around it. So it's absolutely viable for surveys as well as chat. It's viable for the database you have now. I mean, the one that I showed was just straight from an Excel I had. That's actually taken not from the full data, it was taken from 25 survey responses. So it's really can be picking up a lot more information than you need. And also social media, I think that's relevant. The next one, text strings, emails, correspondence. Yeah, you got that. That's great. You mentioned employee experience. Do you have any use cases for mining employee data? I don't myself. I don't know, Mike, whether I got anything from employees. I think it equally applies. I have used employee data and been aware of it for those 2 cases of Boeing that I showed, and also for the case of the NHS. That was actually using a very specific program called SenseMaker, and that was a different way of doing some of the same work in terms of tagging by getting employees to self-state what their key emotional sense were. Slightly different, but I think the point is, if you're getting that pulse information and those verbatims, it absolutely and equally applies. I don't think there's any difference between tagging customers or clients as there are for tagging employee rich verbatims that you get either. Okay, I'm trying. Yeah, okay, it's joining customer experience data with employee experience data to demonstrate correlation. I was a bit wary of this because you've got a survey, you've got a chat that states an issue, and then you've got a separate data set, that entirely separate data set around employees. So you're correlating or regressing 2 different data sets. My personal opinion is it better to stick with the drivers and destroyers of value for the customer, let's say NPS, against, let's say, 3 things. Imagine knowledgeability of rep, price, and I don't know, quality of good. Look for those and then relate it back to employee data. Is there sufficient training in X, Y, Z? Rather than directly correlating. I always think you should be focused on the customer data, not try and take in something else. So if knowledgeability of agent is really important and demonstrate knowledgeability as a destroyer of NPS, then you can look for how knowledgeable and what training there is in your employee cohort, and maybe do an A/B test or whatever you might want to do, rather than mixing. A little bit wary of mixing data like that. Yeah, correlation does not imply causation. I tend to use the word, as you've seen, regression modeling, which again is not causation, but maybe I can argue that it's a little bit closer sometimes. But I think that as long as you're aware of it, we can't throw all the data, all the baby out with the bathwater. Otherwise, we'd have useless data. We'd have to make some assumptions of it that sound fair and reasonable to the audience. Does it sound fair and reasonable to say, for instance, that if there's an experience that we could create, just as Chewy did when their dog died, around picking up that phraseology and creating a workflow? the way that we're looking at emotion alerts is a lot less actually focused on individual, not possibly individual, but a few cases that are really important, rather than trying to boil the ocean with emotion by getting in masses of data. Our starting point is, where is the outcome for the business? Chewy, the outcome was creating a great experience around dog food. Their dog died. Well, perhaps not a great experience, but you get a comfort experience or a calming experience. Other examples that are completely missed are where you can use interaction analytics, where there's an emotion intensity. I missed my flight, I need to go to a funeral, or I lost my wedding dresses. That creates that new cases that are very cause and effect driven, very cause and effect driven. I don't think we can argue that to create emotion alerts. Emotion alerts is very, very much a case of combining human understanding with the business, with absolutely engineering about fine-tuning the data, but making it in such a way that it's relevant for the business and they can generate and demonstrate value from it. So hopefully that's understandable. And is any of these affected by cultural difference? That's a good question. I don't have the answer to that, to be honest with you. I think cultural differences will come out because we're looking very much at the practicality of phraseology that's used. Certainly within the gambling industry, you're going to get very different phraseology that, but I feel out of control, or I've got a mental health situation, to something like a shipping documentation industry. So it's absolutely affected in culture in that sense by businesses and their individual needs. By whether the Americans are going to be different than the UK, that's something I can't answer. The example I gave from defraud was actually came from India. So I think my base level comment is that where emotions can be expressed, and intensely so, they can be expressed in any culture, would be my general sense. Although I suspect in some cultures they'd be might have more positive connotations and be masking more, you know, the kind of thing that I illustrated earlier, rather than saying I'm really angry with you, I want my discounts, say, please can you give me my discounts? I suspect there is a difference in that, but in honesty, I don't think the work has actually absolutely been done at all. But there may well be cultural references for different AI models. And Mike, I don't know whether you have any view on that. It's kind of an interesting thing whether different AI and machine learning differs culturally between countries. Do you have any experience of that or anything to say?
Yeah, it's certainly so. As far as AI systems and especially large language models, there are issues with bias, and cultural differences would definitely appear. I think something Stephen has alluded to many times in his talk was using sort of big data models. They tend to have very generic and very biased processes for understanding things, for analyzing your data. I think what a lot of this gets at is the future of doing all this automated CX work is going to be in fine tuning and matching your ML systems to your actual data, training on your actual data that you're capturing through your own chats in your businesses, and your other sources of text that you can get. So the cultural differences, I think, is just the general AI machine learning bias problem, which ultimately boils down to the data problem. All of these solutions require a really good data discipline in your organization to make sure you have good data going in, so you get good data out. That's the only way these systems can work.
Yeah, and I think the issue which is becoming urgent, I think, Mike, is around the move from from NLP to more complex NLP, I guess, with large language models. And a lot of the voice of the customer platforms don't actually do that, but they will need to do it. So they will need to inject more, to make the most about it, more fine tuning, more humans in the loop, to make it valuable going forward in the next few years. Is that correct?
Definitely. And I think as these companies, voice of customer platforms and chat platforms that have ML and AI integrated into them, call-centered software that has AI and ML integrated into them, the ones that will be the best and the most powerful for you are the ones that are going to fine-tune on your data or give you a way to get your humans and your employees in the loop of their sort of training feedback systems.
So I think there is a competitive battle that's going to happen. The winners will be the ones with the best understanding and the best workflows around the data that they collect And that requires being able to have better fine tuning. That's going to be the battleground. So what we're saying is we're looking at a process and showing a process where we focused on that fine tuning, because the ones that will lose will be the ones where their models are not fine tuned, where they don't have interaction alerts, where they don't mine the data that they already host, for instance, chat or other for experiences. That would be the general view. So it is a very important and growing competitive advantage. Fine tuning, focus on it, not just generalized big data AI. Hopefully that's okay, Mike. Great. Okay. Any more questions? I can't see any more, Anna. Is that it?
There is not, but if someone wants to turn on their mics, it's always okay.
Any complex questions go to Mike on engineering, yeah.
So I think no more questions.
Okay. Well, look, Anna, if I may say, what we're going to do is we'll send the presentation to yourself. Is that right?
Yeah.
It will be available to everybody. And if our contact details are there. So if you need to have any questions at all, please reach out to myself or Mike Kibble. We'll put our contacts on there. We're very happy to answer any further questions, give you more demonstration of what we're doing and how we might be able to help and educate you more on this area.
Thank you all for being here with us and spending an hour of your free afternoon or morning. So enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you all soon at our next DJC meeting. Thank you so much.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks, Mike.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye-bye.